For me, day one of a tournament kind of feels like a warm-up. It's about getting settled in, trying to find your rhythm, and just trying to make it through the day. Day two is where the pressure starts to build, the stacks get deeper, and every decision carries a little bit more weight. And that's exactly where I am now, in the middle of day two of the APTC 10K main event. Let's get right back into the action. Blinds are 700, 1400. I look down at King 3 of diamonds in the big blind. There's an open from the low jack to 3000. Everybody folds to me. With a suited king here, I'm definitely calling. However, also being mindful that my hand can sometimes easily be dominated by a better king that the low jack could be opening with. So definitely have to proceed cautiously. So we go to the flop of 9 of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, deuce of hearts. I flop a king high flush draw with a backdoor flush draw and an overcard to the king. I check it over to the low jack, who decides to make a c-bet of 4500. Here I think I could choose to flat call or check raise. I think some of the benefits of check raising include getting my opponent to fold hands like king 10, king jack, which dominate my hand, as well as setting up a multi-barrel bluff, as there's quite a few turn cards that can give me more equity, such as a 3 or a 6. But in this hand, I decided to just call and see what my opponent does on the turn. The turn came the queen of spades. I checked, and the low jack decides to bet again, this time for 12,000. This turn card is definitely better for the low jack's range. However, when my opponent bets again for this sizing, I think her range is quite polarized. And I think I'm also losing to some of her bluffs. Hands like king 10, king jack, ace 4 suited, ace 3 suited. And I think on this turn, there's actually not that many value hands. So against the polarized betting range on the turn that may consist of some bluffs, I think check raising with my hand here is superior than check calling. I counted up my stack. I had about 69k. My opponent had slightly less. I ultimately decided to make a very risky play, but one that I thought was going to work often enough. I raised it to 31,000. I think if my opponent happened to have a drawing hand, they're really not getting a good price to continue, and I also think this raise looks very strong. Unless my opponent was ready to play for the rest of what I have behind, they're often going to have to fold almost everything except for top pair or better. My opponent thinks about it for a while. I think she kind of suspected something was up, but there's really not much she can do about it unless her hand is good enough to call down. So eventually she does decide to let it go. Blinds are up, 1k, 2k. I look down at ace king offsuit in the low jack. It folds around to me and I raise it up to 5k. And now the player in the hijack, 3 bets to 15k. Everybody else folds back to me. I look over at his stack, he has around 67,000. I do have him covered by quite a bit. I think against his stack size, anything other than shoving here would be a mistake. I'm out of position and I don't want to just call and give him a chance to realize his equity. So I do shove all in. He thinks about it for a bit and does eventually fold. I think with these stack sizes, there's really no reason to get fancy. If he does have a hand like jacks plus, the chips are going to most likely get in either way. We'll just have to be ready to take on the flip and embrace the variance. The next big hand happens at the 1200, 2400 blind level. I'm under the gun +1 and look down at queen 10 of spades. The player sitting to my right under the gun opens to 4k. I flat the 4k. It folds around to the small blind, who puts in the call as well. The big blind folds and we go 3 ways to the flop of ace of clubs, 9 of spades, 8 of spades. This is a huge flop for my hand. I flop a queen high flush draw with a gutter to the jack. The small blind checks, the original raiser checks. I decide to put a bet out for 5,500. The small blind thinks about it for a bit and decides to check raise to 14,000. The original raiser folds, and here I have an interesting decision. I looked over at his stack and calculated that he had about 33 big blinds behind. I had him covered. I think by default, a lot of players might just automatically go all in here. With such a strong draw, it can't be that bad of a play. But if you really think about what the small blind's range consists of, if he's check raising with any combination of the 2 pairs, I really don't have much fold equity against any of those hands. And the one hand that I need to be slightly concerned about is ace x of spades. I block jack 10 of spades, and one of the combo draws that I have dominated is 7-6 of spades, but that's only one combination. So versus his entire range and being able to play the rest of the hand in position, I think calling is the better play. So I do just put in the call, and the turn comes the 6 of spades. I hit the queen high flush right away, but this does not slow him down as he reaches for chips and bets again, this time for 20k. There's still no reason to raise here as I'm still behind king high and ace high flushes. I just put in the call again. The river comes the deuce of hearts, and finally he decides to check. Now I'm almost certain that I have the best hand. It's just a question of how much value can I get. I looked over at his stack. He had about 47k left. My first instinct was to just put the rest of it in, but after some more thought, I felt that this player would be more likely to call a large bet, but not for his tournament life. I decided to bet 35k, leaving him about 12k or so behind, which made it really difficult for him to fold if he was holding 2 pair or a set. He does call it off, and I show him the bad news, and I scoop in another very decently sized pot. Blinds are still 1200, 2400. I'm under the gun with ace queen of diamonds. I raise it up to 5k. The player to my left, who's now the hijack since we're 6-handed, pushes all in. Everybody folds back to me. I counted up his stack, which ended up being 54,600, around 22 big blinds. I have him well covered, but it's a big shove. My hand's just too strong. I do make the call. I'm pretty sure we're flipping, and I'm not surprised when he turns over pocket jacks. The flop comes 7-4-6. The turn is a 5, giving me some chop outs. I'd be more than happy to chop, but the river comes the queen. I get very lucky here down to the last card, and my stack is now up to around 255,000, which is about 106 big blinds. It feels great to win this flip. So nothing really significant happens for me in the 1500 3k blind level, but then at the 2k 4k blind level, this hand comes up. I'm under the gun and look down at pocket kings. I raise it up to 8k. It folds around to the player in the cutoff, who just sat down and is also the table's new chip leader. He chooses to 3-bet me to 23k. I think in this spot, being this deep and out of position, playing straightforwardly and putting in a 4-bet is going to be the smartest play. If he happens to have jacks or queens, I really want to get more chips into the pot. Perhaps if I was playing in position and the stacks were shorter, I could consider slow playing and just flatting. So I counted up my stack and decided to 4-bet to 65k. I think it's important not to go too small and give him too good of a price to peel a flop, but I also think going too large would be a small mistake. I do want to give him room to go all in. So I ended up leaving myself around 133,000 behind. After I put in the raise, he seemed pretty annoyed and ended up folding. I think in general, if you identify a player as being pretty proficient post-flop, there's not too much value in playing it slow with hands like pocket kings. They're just not really going to make that many mistakes. Trying to cooler them pre-flop is probably going to end up being the most plus EV play. But with that said, it is important to mix up your strategy, especially against thinking opponents. And in this hand, I have ace-king, but I'm on the button in position against him. He's under the gun +1 and opens to 8k. This time, I decided to play pretty deceptively and just flat. Small blind folds, but the big blind decides to make the call. We go 3 ways to the flop of queen of clubs, 7 of clubs, 4 of clubs. I am holding the ace of clubs. The big blind checks, under the gun +1 checks, and I decided to take the free card and check it back. The turn comes the 10 of diamonds, and now the big blind leads out for 18k. The original raiser calls, and now the action is on me. So in addition to the nut flush draw, I now also picked up a gutter to the nut straight. Being in position with this added equity, I thought that this was a good opportunity for a squeeze play. If the big blind had just top pair or worse, it'd be difficult for him to call a raise. I thought that I could credibly represent some slow played flushes. I decided to put in the raise for 45k. Unfortunately, after some thought, the big blind does decide to put in the call. The original raiser folds, and we go to the river, which is the 8 of hearts. I missed everything. The big blind checks to me. I'm left with ace high, which is unlikely to be good in this spot. Holding the nut flush blocker, it was tempting for me to keep bluffing and put in a massive bet, but I really thought that he had quite a strong range after he was able to bet the turn and then call my raise with the original raiser still left to act behind him. He also had me well covered in chips. He could afford to call and lose. I decided to step on the brakes here and give up. He ends up turning over pocket 7s for a set of 7s. After seeing his hand, it's tough to say whether he was willing to call a big river bet, but as I suspected, he was very strong on the turn. I guess we'll never know if it would have worked if I tried to represent the nut flush. Making it to the end of day 2 felt really good. Out of 671 total entrants, I was one of the 133 players that remained. bagging 187,000 in chips. But there's still a long battle ahead and plenty of poker left to play, so the plan remains the same. Stay focused, stay patient, and keep finding the right spots to build my stack. See you guys back here for day 3 in the next one.
喜欢我的影片，不要忘记按赞、订阅、打开小铃铛。